Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are down in the Wild Child headquarters of Darren Robinson. Mate, can you tell us what's going on?
End of season for us over in Adelaide, so middle of May whenever we raced last. We come back to Melbourne. It's time to strip the boat out. We've got a big season ahead of us, so we've working through all the little niggly things that we need to replace. We've got a fuel tank leak, the wear plate underneath the bottom of the boat. We've had to take that out. New prop shafts, had them cut up the other day, and we've inserted one of those last weekend. Working on a couple of new propellers, going through the motor, through all the data from the last race meeting, trying to improve our tune. And then we've got another motor behind that one that we want to put a new set of pistons in before next season and get running and tuned up. So we've got a lot on at the moment.
So Darren, you've got 3 motors in the engine shop. I'd call it that tonight. This is your workshop. But can you tell us, there's 3 different engines. Can you tell us a little bit about each one of those ones?
So there's we've got a 1471 high helix 480 Chev. We use that only these days on a real short track, mainly because we can get lots of torque out of that and lots of acceleration out of the corner. But with the high helix supercharger, it seems to run out of puff at about 7,000 or about 130 mile an hour. We just run out of speed. So we use that on a place like Melton. We'll use that motor because it's a very short track, and the terminal speed on the boat is never much more than 130, 135 mile an hour. So that motor is perfect for that. We've got 2 other motors here, which are both PSI motors. We use them on any track that's over 600 metres or over. Adelaide, for example. The back one's a 480. We're about to put high compression pistons in that one. And the one in front here, that's the newest addition to the range, and that was the motor we ran at the Marge in Adelaide for the first time, and that's a new 510 with the PSI on it.
Beautiful stuff. Darren, a little bit about the boat, Wild Child itself. It's been around for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of it?
Yeah, so this is the first purpose-built 21-foot child's play that Rob and Gary Newell built. We ordered it about 2008, something like that. Took them about 3 years to build it. So originally it was going to be an off-centre cell, so they built the tub, built the deck, and then they didn't like the deck, so the deck ended up on another boat, and then they come back to the mid-centre design. And laid it up from that. But the boat is the first of its kind, and probably one of its kind, because Rob and Gary hand laid 90% of the cell. It's all carbon fibre. Since then they've come up with a different design, which is similar to what Shep's running now, with the open cell that flips up and down, whereas this one was just the thought process was side impact. I'd raced open boats before we bought this boat, and I was always concerned that somebody was going to run over me and take me out. So a lot of guys who run crash bars and things like that, I didn't think that was the right way to go. And I'd seen what Rob Fasala had done with cells, and I thought, yeah, he's on the right track, but we want a really good, side impact cell. And generally when you have an impact, it's coming from this side, so that side of the cell is like bulletproof. You could, you run a truck over it and I'll be okay. So that we sort of pushed Newells to do that for us, and they were happy to do it, and they could see that was the future of racing. So we went down that path, and about 2010 we got the boat on the water for the first time.
Darren, talking about some of the history, obviously up on the wall behind us there is a lot of photography of you in your early years starting off. Darren, where did you come from? What was your first boat?
The first boat I had was a little 14-foot skiff, a clinker boat, down from Tassie originally. Chris Palmer territory. So Chris and his brother Nigel and I have all come up from junior ranks. So I started, racing when I was 17 years of age. Raced in that for a year or two, then I took over Dad's hydro. We had a 20-foot hydro with a 5-litre Ford engine in it at the time, and then I managed to destroy that, flip that at one of the Devonport regattas. Then we jumped into a Stevens, ran that for about a year or two, and then decided it was time to get a decent boat, so we bought our first Child's Play, which was a little 18-foot Child's Play. We ran that around the country a few times, so a lot of people might have seen that back in the early days, back about 2000 to 2004. We ran that around, we went everywhere from Bundaberg to Adelaide to Berry. Anywhere we could race, we went and tried to race that. And then we had a couple of close calls with Stanley's in Agent Orange and Truly Wicked over in Berry one time. And I was driving back home one morning and the wife said, "Oh, I'm pregnant." And I said, "Oh, I better get a safer boat." So then we bought this boat. So that's my history. So I've been racing for 30 odd years, and most of those years I've been racing against Mr. Palmer. So we've got a lifelong rivalry, and before that, his father and my father used to race against each other as well. So the Palmer Robinson thing goes back, 45, 50 years now.
That's amazing sort of history. You don't get that too often.
No, it's very rare, and it's always good to beat Chris, even though he says I'll never beat him. But I've got 6 Cock of the Merseys in there on the shelf that say that I won his home race 6 times, and his father's name's on that race now, and it's always a pleasure to take that one away from him like I did last year.
There you go. Darren, your upcoming season, this season that you're planning to attend, what sort of races, whereabouts are you going?
We're going to start, I think, sometime late September. We'll do a club day at Epilock, just to test and tune, make sure the boat's going okay. Then we're heading off to Newcastle, so we're going to go and do the Newcastle thing. We didn't go last year. After that, I don't know what's around the corner in November, but there'll be something. Usually something out at Glenmaggie.
Glenmaggie's usually in November.
So we'll do Glenmaggie. We've got the Worlds obviously in January, so we'll do the double header there. Back to Melton, do the Melton Gold Cup. Then plans to go to Tassie again, do Devonport Regatta and Granton the following weekend. And back to Melbourne. Don't know what's happening in April, but no doubt there'll be something at Epilock or Yarrawonga. And then probably the Marge in May, I suppose, and that'll be our short season.
It's a big season, a lot of racing in between times. Obviously, this is a big sort of thing to start getting around and travelling around the countryside. Can you tell us a little bit of how you actually transport the boat?
It goes in a transporter. We've built a 10-metre one now. We've started off with a little one, and then we got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like everything else we do with boat racing. So it's now 10 metres long. The whole boat goes inside of it. The front of the transporter is fitted out. So all the toolboxes you see here in the shed all go in the front of the transporter on tables and wrapped around the front of it. The boat comes in behind it, and everything gets carted around. So we're carrying, I think, nearly 5 tonne. It's 4.5 tonne legitimately, but I think it's closer to 5. Of gear around with us anywhere we go in Australia. So that's on the back of the Ram, and then on the back of one of my work cars, usually a Ranger or something like that, we have a spare motor, which we don't carry in the transporter, and we carry at least 2 drums of fuel, maybe sometimes 3 drums of fuel with us. So we have another, almost tonne of gear on another car. So it makes it fun.
It's such a massive sort of thing to get around. Obviously, you can't do it by yourself. Tell us a little bit about your crew.
I've got a crew of guys that, depending on the states we're in, we sort of sub in a few guys. But there's Old Faithful, so Dougie. He's been on my crew for about 20 years now. Dougie Smith, he's around boat racing forever. He used to race back in the day himself. So Dougie's like our crew chief. He comes everywhere with me. He lives here over summer. He stays here of a weekend. He'll come over on a Saturday. We work all day Saturday, all day Sunday on the boat, and he'll stay overnight, much to his missus' disgust, but that's life. And then I've got a couple of older sons that help me out, and a couple of guys I'm originally from Tassie, so a couple of guys from Tassie help me out. So young Kent he's not so young these days, but he'll fly around the countryside and help us out at different events. And in the last couple of years, we've recruited young Doug, so Doug's son's helping us out. So it's a bit of a family affair with a few mates most of the time, but we can't do it without any less than 4 or 5 people at a racetrack, and something like the Marge, where you're going and trying to do your absolute best, we'd like to have 6 to 7 people in our crew for those sort of meetings. The Worlds next year with the same, we'll have to have a crew of 6 or 7 to put on a show and keep everything going. For example, if we blow a motor or have a motor issue, it's a 30-40 minute changeover, and that's with 6 guys. If you had 2 guys doing it, it'd take you all day to do it. So you have to have the crew there for the just in cases, and the more crew you got around, the easier life becomes.
Tell us a little bit about some of the racetracks. Which would be your personal favourite?
Being a Tassie boy, I have to say Granton's my number 1 favourite track in the country. It's good for this boat. It's long. We always give the Formula Ones, like the best Formula Ones in the country, we give them a run for their money. I've beaten Rhys Cole down there a couple of years ago. I've beaten Craig Bailey only last year for the Riverside Trophy. So it's my favourite track. I think Dargle's close behind it, but Granton is certainly the favourite track. And funnily enough, next year the MYC2 is turning 100 years old, so March next year it's going to be on. I think it'll be the 2 Palmer boys and myself up against, I think, Rhys Cole and Craig Bailey and whoever else they can get out of New South Wales to represent Formula Ones down there. So it's going to be a big affair for Hobart next year.
I think everyone should be going down to Hobart in March of next year.
Yeah, it'll be on for Donkey Kong, because Chris and I don't like losing to inboards, and everybody knows how competitive Chris is, and he has to win at all costs. And when it comes to racing, people like Craig Bailey, he's been around for years, and it's nothing better than beating an old dog that's at the top of his game. So yeah, you can walk out of a race meeting like that, and you've done well. You know you're doing okay in the whole scheme of things as well.
Darren, a little bit about your engines. Who's doing the tune on those?
At the moment, that'd be me. So no, Brett Nidgery does a great job of building the engines for us, but on race day he's a crew member to many crews, so he doesn't come around and do our tune. I do the tune. We run race pack, and we have laptops, and we get all the data. We pull it up on the screen and I basically read through it. So I've got half a brain sometimes, not when I'm driving the boat, but when I'm on the shore I'm okay. So we just analyse the data, and it's all about reading temperatures and working out how you can change fuel in each nozzle of the boat, or on each cylinder effectively, and you tune it up bit by bit. That's why you need to be at a racetrack a day before or 2 days before a race meeting to understand what the air is doing at that particular track, and how you apply the data that you get back to changing the fuel around on the system. It's not computer controlled, it's computer monitored, so you have to manually go in and mechanically change the fuel delivery in the engine.
Fantastic facts with that one. Darren, obviously to run this sort of operation is quite costly and quite expensive. I'm sure you've got a sponsor or two that you'd like to pat on the back and say thank you.
I'd love to have a sponsor, but I don't have one. So, it's me. I work for a very long time in my life, and I've accumulated things as we go along. So I've got lots of money tied up here in boats and engines, but it's all me. I don't really have any corporate sponsors coming along and tapping on the door and handing over money. So every cent that goes into the boat pretty much comes from myself, and Dougie helps out here and there, but we don't have anybody writing a cheque for 20 grand a year to say, put my name on your boat, Darren. Unfortunately, love to have somebody, and I think the transporter's got about 9 metres of spare space to put signage on if somebody wants to jump on board.
That's a good plug. Darren, you said earlier that you're replacing some of the plates and everything in the boat, going over it, obviously. So tell us what's going on with some of the plate work underneath the boat.
Underneath the boat, you've got the propeller at the back end of the boat, and it's doing around about 13,000 revs per minute when you're going full noise. In a salty water, that's putting up little particles of salt in the water, and it's basically chipping away at the bottom of the boat. So the aluminium plates that are underneath there, they wear out very, very, very quickly. So basically at the end of a season now, we have to pull that plate out and completely replace it, and we've got to the point now where we're actually inserting stainless steel plates inside of an aluminium plate and trying to slow the wear down on the bottom of the boat. But depending on the water, whether it's salt or fresh, and the different propellers we're running, you put a lot of burn into the bottom of the boat over a weekend, and we just basically got to replace stuff. It's just wearing out. It's like a pair of tyres on a car. You're just smoking them up every time you go out there. So the bottom of the boat's just getting chewed up all the time. If we don't replace it, we'll get a hole in the boat and she'll just go straight to the bottom. So
it's a good way of explaining things. Actually, while we're on the subject, the difference between saltwater and freshwater. I know that there is a difference. What's it affect with you being a driver?
Salt water's it's like driving on a sponge. It's very light. The boat doesn't want to stick to the water. So when you come out of a corner and you accelerate, the boat just wants to launch itself off the water. So driving around a corner, it's almost full cav plate while you accelerate. Whereas you go down to Tassie on freshwater upstream, and you can come out of a corner and half cav plate, and you're away and you're out of the corner. So the different salt waters conditions, and there's different salt waters amongst salt waters. You can go to Adelaide and it's really salty, and you can go to a place like Devonport, for example, and it's not as salty. So the boat's a little bit less buoyant. So you jump from one weekend to another, where I've done, Tassie one weekend and into Milton Reservoir the next weekend, and you don't know how to drive the boat. You look like a dickhead the first day because you're driving something you're not used to because you've tuned yourself to the other conditions. So it's interesting to get used to changing circuits. One good thing about the Worlds, when we do the Worlds next year, is both those circuits are a river, inland river, so you're going to be on a freshwater circuit all the time. So when you go from Windsor down to Berry, it's similar water and similar altitudes as well, so the tunes don't change too much either.
That's some interesting facts. Darren, changes between the engines, are you actually changing the gearbox ratio, for instance, when you're changing these motors in and out?
No, we run the same gears all the time. We just have a propeller that meets the engine. So depending on the track, I think we've got about 7 different propellers now. Depending on the track, we choose a propeller that suits the engine and suits the track we're on. So we just change that on the day. We've done every track that many times now. We know that number 6 propellers for Melton, and the number 1 propellers for Adelaide, and the number 2 propellers for Devonport. So we know what propeller to use when we turn up at a track, and just match it with the engine we've got on the boat at the time.
Another interesting fact would be, how much oil are you going through?
That's another little expense that we hate having to deal with, but every race meet, and we'd burn 25-30 litres of oil we throw out because the engine's regurgitating oil, it's breathing, so it spits oil out of it each race. You can lose on a big race up to 8 litres out of the engine, so a pail of oil is 20 litres, doesn't last that long over a weekend.
We were discussing earlier, just before shooting this, obviously, we started discussing the cost going into this sort of stuff. So for those people watching at home, Darren, how big's your fuel tank and how much fuel are you using?
We're running around about 140 litre tank, and we're excising about 110 litres in a big race or a long race. So that's half a 44, and a 44 gallon drum of fuel is about $350 these days. So it's $175 to put the fuel in it for one race at the moment.
Adds up real quick, smart. And what about towing the boat around?
We use a Dodge Ram. We've got a 10 metre transporter. So to get that anywhere, you're looking at probably $1,500 return home trip with fuel for that. And then because we use so much fuel, we have another car that we tow the trailer with 2 or 3 drums of fuel on, and that's not cheap either. So you're up for a few grand just to leave the house these days.
Just starting the motor is expensive. Darren, while we're actually discussing this sort of thing, weather, climate, and your fuel. So what does the weather conditions and different race venues do to your tune?
Nothing's ever the same, unfortunately. We can't go from Tassie to Melbourne or Melbourne to Adelaide and have the same tune in the boat. So everywhere we go, you spend 2 or 3 races actually getting the motor close to perfect. It's getting to the point now where we almost have to go somewhere a day before we race and make sure we get practice in. And it's not one practice, it's 2 or 3 practices to get it close to where you want it to be for the weekend. For example, when you go to Adelaide, you're probably changing 20,000 different pills to what you're using in Hobart, because it's completely different air, completely different temperature. If it's high humidity or low humidity, everything changes. Everything changes over the weekend too. You can go from having a boat perfectly tuned on Saturday afternoon, and the weather changes overnight, and then on Sunday it's not so good. So we can drop 5-10 mile an hour over a weekend.
So talking about mile an hour, tell us, how many people are up racing at the top end?
At the moment, I think there's probably 6-7 boats in Australia that are doing 140 mile an hour plus. You look at the Marge the other day over in Adelaide, and quality field, and it wouldn't have been one boat in that final that wasn't doing 140 mile an hour or better. And we were certainly doing better, but weren't doing better enough. We were a couple of mile an hour off the pace. Unfortunately, we lost a set of EGTs on our the left bank of our engine, so we're tuning the engine on 4 cylinders while we're in Adelaide, but we've replaced that since. But there's a lot of good boats out there now, and the top end of the field, the ones that are making the finals these days, you've got to be doing 140 mile an hour, or you're not even going to get in the final.
Well, Darren, thank you very much for inviting us down here to your shed, letting us in on your inner sanctum. Mate, I know the boat's not together at the moment. There's motors sitting on the side here, but what we might do is come back once the motor's back in the boat and you've done a little bit of testing, and we'll catch up with you sometime shortly.
Yeah, no problem at all. I reckon another 4 or 5 weeks we'll be looking all right, and you might actually see one of these things sitting inside the thing, and we'll be ready to test and tune. So hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thanks very much for your time, Darren.
Thanks. Bye.